Thank you for joining me today for the third session of my online workshop for female investors. I appreciate your interest in the workshop. And we have one more person coming in now that I'm just letting in. So I'll let her join and then I will go. All right, we should be all set. All right, so again, thank you for joining me today for this third session of my online workshop for female investors. I hope you found the first two sessions helpful. This is what we covered the first week. We talked about why I offer the workshop, talked about saving versus investing. We discussed budgeting, the importance of setting priorities, the idea of considering today and tomorrow when you're thinking about planning. We talked about inflation, which has become such a hot topic recently because of the fact that we've had the highest inflation in 40 years. And then we talked about managing credit cards and debt. Does anybody have any questions about anything under those topics? And then this is what we covered last week. We talked a lot about Social Security benefits. We talked about stocks, bonds, mutual funds, exchange traded funds. We took a look at investment returns, the importance of diversification. And then I talked about our single biggest expense, which last week I didn't tell you on the slide till after I talked about it, but this time I have it there. It's income taxes. And that's why there's a lot of planning that we try to do to help you pay your fair share and not more. This week, I'm going to talk about estate planning considerations. And I'm going to give an overview of financial planning, an overview, some retirement planning basics, and then the rest of the time will be as long as you'd like to stay for Q&A and discussion. And I tried to add some things. I added a little bit because there's a couple other questions that got asked in earlier sessions that I hadn't gone over, so I made sure that I included them today. So first, we're going to talk about estate planning considerations. So the first thing to remember, when we talked about this before, and I'm sure you know that on average, women live longer than men. That means that they're more likely to be the survivor in a couple. I think I mentioned in the first session that the age of the average widow is 59. That makes estate planning and these type of issues even more important. You really want to protect yourself, your best interests, your family, and your assets. An estate plan, it's much more than a will. It's a comprehensive and complete way to prepare yourself, your assets, and your loved ones for the future. You want to remember the first step to creating an estate plan is understanding the basics. Now, among the basics are you want to make sure you name beneficiaries. And naming beneficiaries is really important when you have financial accounts, because if you've named your beneficiaries, when you pass away, the beneficiary designations matter. That's where the assets are going to go first. And that also allows them to avoid going through probate. And by avoiding going through probate, that means that there's a cost that's avoided. You also want to have living will or advanced directives, power of attorney. You want to make sure that your will is current and you want to have an up-to-date listing of the important assets. When it comes to property, you want to look at real estate vehicles, bank accounts, life insurance policies, your retirement plans, your investments, your collectibles, your family heirlooms, all those things are going to be included. The biggest estate planning mistake you can make is not having a plan at all. This matters even more when you're unmarried, because if you don't have a plan in place, then the state's going to determine what happens to your assets. So you want to make sure that you put all those things down in writing so that the state doesn't dictate where things would go, because it might not be where you want them to go. According to a 2020 Gallup poll, just 45% of Americans have a living will. Well, the number of those with a living will is 5% above what it was back in 2005. That still leaves more than half of Americans without an estate plan, and many of them are women. We've heard stories in the past couple of years about people like Prince and I think it was Roberta Flack who died without a will, and so that just makes things a lot more difficult. Some specific estate planning tips for women. You want to identify a healthcare proxy. If you become incapacitated, who do you trust to make your healthcare decisions? If you don't appoint a healthcare proxy, the courts are going to assign somebody, and that may not be a person that you trust. A healthcare power of attorney allows one person to indefinitely make decisions on behalf of another. You want to make sure that you designated a financial power of attorney. Are you single, but with a life partner? Are you estranged from family members? Who do you trust to take care of your finances? If you become incapacitated, a durable power of attorney is used to allow the designated person to handle your financial affairs or any other specific area of your life. So you want to make sure that you have documents that kind of lay out how those things are going to be managed and who's going to take care of them. This is one that's become more and more important over the years as things become more and more digital. You want to make sure that not only when I talk about digital assets, it's more than just the electronic files and programs or records. You also want to make sure that you document all your Social Security and media account logins, all your financial account logins. And why is that? Because it used to be, and I remember there was a time when I lived in Tucson and I worked for the Public Fiduciary's Office, and our role there was to serve as the personal representative, guardian, conservator when there wasn't a family member willing to do things like that. If somebody died, you used to be able to go to the mailbox and you could get statements. Now, most of the brokerage firms charge you to get a statement. So if something happens to you, if people don't know what accounts you have, they don't even know you have them. They don't know how to access them. So it's really important to have a list of passwords and login information for your accounts. You can do it when I get new clients, I send them a little book that they can use to put that information. You can also use a software program like I like LastPass and use that to keep your passwords, and then make sure like whoever that designated person is, if it's in that written form, they know where to find that book. And if it's online, that they know what the master password is so that they can access those accounts and get to them. It really applies to even your social media accounts, because if something happens to you, your account can just stay there if nobody has the ability to change it or to take it offline. You want to make sure that you protect your business, your employees, and your heirs by creating a plan to manage or sell your business if you have one, if something happens to you. And you also just want to make sure that your assets are protected for your heirs. An attorney with expertise in estates and trusts can advise you on the best way to protect your assets and avoid unnecessary taxes that could limit your beneficiary's inheritance. So again, that gets the idea of making sure that all your accounts have a named beneficiary. And actually right now, I know that not all the accounts that I have under my management have that information. So I have my son going through all my accounts and making note of those that don't have those designations with them, so that I can reach out to everybody and make sure that that does get updated, because it's really important. So you shouldn't be surprised that I have one more quiz today, and I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to answer the questions, and then we'll go over them as we have in the past. Let me just open that up on the screen. Okay, you should be, I have to hit launch first. That's not the right one. Sorry, I got to get the right one. I thought I had it. It didn't do what I wanted. It's this one. Hold on. I don't know why it's not bringing up the one that I want. I apologize. For some reason, I've done this. It worked all the other times. It doesn't seem to want to work right today for me. Oh, I know why. Okay. Now we're good. I apologize for the delay. Here you go.
All right, that's been 5 minutes, and I see 5 and 6 of you have completed it. So I'm going to get started, and you can always get your answers in at the end. The first question: if you had a well-diversified portfolio of 50% stocks and 50% bonds, it was worth $100,000 at retirement. Based upon historical returns in the US, the most you can afford to withdraw each year is about, the correct answer is B, $4,000 plus inflation each year to have a 95% chance your assets will last for 30 years. So that's more commonly referred to as the 4% rule. There are some people that have written research recently talking about the fact that that might have to be a little bit lower because we have such a low interest rate environment. And the number I've seen thrown out there right now is about 3.3%, but it definitely could be a little bit lower just because of the fact that we have such a low interest rate environment. The second question: to maximize the safe withdrawal rate from a portfolio over a 30-year retirement period, it's best to hold. The correct answer to this is C, 50 to 60% in equities throughout retirement. That's the rate that they have used when they're looking at, the
asset allocation that they've used when looking at that safe withdrawal rate. The reason for that is, we talked about earlier that the idea that stocks provide historically better returns than bonds. And so if we get too heavy into bonds, then we hurt the ability for our portfolio to get some growth to offset some of the money that we're taking out of it. Third question, a 25% negative single year return in a retirement portfolio would have the biggest impact on long-term retirement security if it occurs. The correct answer to this is B, at retirement. This question really looks at the issue of longevity risk, the risk that we outlive our money. So if it was 15 years prior to retirement, we'd have the ability to make up for it because we can continue to add money. And so if you think about it, if you were putting $1,000 into your retirement plan every 2 weeks when you got paid, and let's say that for simple math, that $1,000 bought 4 shares at $250 each. If the market fell by 25%, so now that $250 is going to be worth $183 roughly. And so now you still, for that same $1,000, you'd buy over 6 shares as opposed to 4. And so if the market just recovered back to 1,000, then that $183 investment would be worth more than $1,000 by a lot, because it would get back to 15, it would be 6 times 250 is 1,500. And the other shares that you had bought at 250 would be back to even. So you have the ability to buy shares at a cheaper price and take advantage of a market recovery. If it's 15 years after retirement begins, it's not pleasant, but you're further along the curve in terms of how, your lifespan and how much time there is, so that it's not as damaging if it happens that far out, because longevity risk becomes less of a concern the longer we live. And so the worst time is right at retirement, because right at retirement, you set your portfolio, you think you're all set, and then all of a sudden it takes a big haircut right at the beginning. So, we talked in the first week, and I'll talk more about it today, the bucket strategy, and that's one of the things that can be used to hopefully help protect against that. Our fourth question is, which of the following strategies is least likely to improve retirement security? And the answers are saving an additional 3% of salary in the 5 years prior to retirement, working for 2 years past the planned retirement date, or deferring Social Security benefits for 2 years longer than originally planned. So the correct answer is going to be working for 2 years past the planned retirement date. And the logic behind that is that while we're working, we have the ability to save. And that's when we can save the most, is while we're working. So hopefully we're saving more than 3%. So working for 2 years past our planned retirement date, that gives us 2 more years where we should be able to accumulate assets. If we save 3% prior to retirement, an additional 3% of salary prior to retirement, that helps, but not as much as if we were working for 2 additional years. If you think about the idea that we want to put in 10 to 20% of our earnings towards retirement savings, that would be much more valuable than the 3% in the 5 years prior. And deferring Social Security benefits for 2 years longer. Well, we talked in last week about how your Social Security benefits grow as you wait to start taking them. From full retirement age to late 70, they grow at 8% per year. Before, from 62 until full retirement age, they're going to grow 6 to 7% a year. That's going to be, again, more than the 3% of salary would give you, because you're going to get that benefit for as long as you live, that additional Social Security benefit. Number 5, a 65-year-old woman has an average life expectancy of approximately an additional. The correct answer is C, 20 years. According to the Social Security Administration's life expectancy calculator, a 65-year-old woman has a life expectancy of 86.6 years, which is 21.6 additional years. Number 6, distributions from an IRA generally must be made every year once an individual has attained age. So the correct age now is 72. That used to be 70 and a half, but the Tax Act that was passed at the end of 2017 increased that age to 72. And so we'll talk a little bit about our RMDs later, because there's also new distribution tables for the RMDs that move the age up to 72 and also increase life expectancy a little bit, so that you actually have to take a little bit less each year. And I think that was the 2019 Secure Act, not 2017. I apologize for that, but that's when it changed, but it definitely is 72. Number 7, which one of the following statements concerning the federal income tax treatment of distributions to a 65-year-old retiree is true? Distributions from a Roth IRA are generally tax-free. Distributions from a traditional IRA are generally taxed as long-term capital gains. Or C, distributions from a traditional IRA for a 65-year-old are generally subject to an additional 10% penalty tax. The correct answer is A. Money that you have in a Roth IRA is generally going to be distributed tax-free. You contribute after-tax dollars to the Roth, and that allows you to generally withdraw the funds tax-free. That's how a Roth is set up. Distributions from a traditional IRA, they are taxed, but they're going to be taxed at your ordinary income tax rates. And that's just kind of make things equal, because when you had the money withheld from your pay, you didn't have to pay any tax on it. It would have been taxed at an ordinary tax rate. So when you pull the money out, it gets taxed at an ordinary tax rate. And under current law, that's a higher rate than the long-term capital gains rate. And the distributions that are going to be subject to an additional 10% penalty tax, the age for that is not 65. It's if you're less than 59 and a half. That's the general rule for when you would pay that additional 10% penalty tax. Number 8, converting a portion of a traditional IRA into a Roth is a good idea this year if. The correct answer to this one is B. You have a big tax deduction this year and your marginal tax rate is lower than normal. Because the idea here is you're trying to do a conversion at a favorable tax rate. So if you had something that made your tax rate this year lower than it's going to be in future years, that would be a good time to do a Roth conversion. If you have the situation A, your marginal tax rate's higher than normal, that's when you wouldn't want to do a Roth, because now you're going to pay tax. You're increasing the chance that the tax rate that you pay when you do that conversion today is going to be higher than it will be in the future. And if the value of the assets in your IRA remain the same for 10 years, that doesn't really have an impact on whether or not it's a good decision to do a Roth conversion. Number 9, suppose that the interest rate on your savings account was 2% per year and inflation was 4% per year. After 1 year, would you be able to buy more than, exactly the same as, or less than today with the money in this account? The correct answer to that is less than today, because you are only earning 2% and inflation is 4%. So the value of your money is depreciating. It's worth less. It'll buy you less. And then the last question, of the following options, the best way to protect against inflation is to have. The correct answer to this is a diversified portfolio of stocks. Historically, a stock portfolio delivers the highest rate of return on average. Bank or CD rates are likely to be less than inflation, and the interest paid by bond is set when the bond is issued. It can be higher or lower than the inflation rate. Bonds also provide lower returns on average than stocks. So it's really just a question of the fact, I know there's more risk, but if we're trying to protect against inflation, having stocks is going to be to our benefit. But we can balance things out. That doesn't mean that we have to have a 100% stock portfolio to protect against inflation. It just means that we have to have stocks in there. And that's why if you go back to the earlier question, when it talked about a 50 to 60% allocation to stocks is kind of the desired level. That's kind of why, so that now you have something to help offset inflation in your portfolio. So that's it for the quiz. Does anybody have any follow-up questions related to that? If not, I'm going to go on and I'm going to start talking about financial planning. Financial planning involves looking at your entire financial picture and determining how you can realize your short and long-term financial goals. The beginning step is what's your net worth. That means what you own or your assets, less what you owe, which are your liabilities. Then it also wants to take into account what you earn, which is your income, and what you spend or your expenses. We then add in short and long-term goals. And those are the things that you want to spend your money on that are important to you. It's important to try to determine what's most important to you and how can you achieve the goals that matter most. It does take into account tax and investment planning, retirement planning and estate planning. And when you look at what you spend, does it align with what's important to you? If it doesn't, you may want to re-examine your spending. Your goals can also include when you want to retire, where you want to live, what you want to do. How much you save and how much you spend are important factors in all these. And that's why tax planning matters so much as part of this process, because we don't want to pay more than our fair share. So we want to figure out ways that we can potentially save taxes so that we lower the overall cost of doing things like pulling money out of our accounts. So let's take a look at goals. A financial plan, it's really a document summarizing your current money situation and your long-term goals from a monetary perspective, as well as personal things that matter to you and the strategies to achieve those goals. On this slide, I've got examples of the types of goals found in many financial plans. And really what I haven't highlighted in red at the top, to me, that's the overriding consideration. I want to put together a financial plan that lets me live my desired lifestyle now and in retirement. Your financial plan is designed to help you make the best use of your money and achieve your long-term financial goals, whether that means sending children to college, buying a bigger home, leaving a legacy, enjoying a comfortable retirement, whatever it may be that matters to you. It should reflect what's important about money to you, and it should focus on helping you live your desired lifestyle both now and in retirement. So like if we look at this list, we can see there's lots of things in here. We have buying a house, paying for education, stop working and doing something you love, go on your dream vacation. Like when I talk about financial plans with people, a lot of them have bucket list items that they want to do. Some people want to move and relocate. Taking care of aging parents can matter, retiring early. Some people want to leave something for their loved ones. All those things can all be included in the financial plan. So this is kind of the process that I use this is my financial planning process. I call it the pathway to an informed retirement. Part of that's because the word apprise means to inform, and it's really designed to help you go from point A on the lower left, which is where there's a lot of uncertainty about what retirement in the future can look like, to point B in the upper right, where you're more informed. So without going through all the steps in detail, those first couple steps, they're really important in helping to establish the client-advisor relationship. Then we want to gather the data that we need to prepare the plan. Then we want to analyze and strategize with that data and use it to build the plan. Then you want to implement the plan. And then once the plan is in place, the other steps are all about maintenance. So like how often do you check in and making sure that and answering any questions that come up and making sure that goals and priorities haven't changed along the way. Retirement planning really means preparing today for your future life so that you continue to meet all your goals and dreams independently. This includes setting retirement goals, estimating the amount of money you're going to need, and investing to grow your retirement savings. Every plan for retirement is unique. Each one is an individual. It's not like there's a cookie cutter and everybody has the same plan with the same goals. Everybody has their own plan. And like when I do plans, software is used to help, and it's personal to you. It's got all your information in it, all the things that matter to you. We have conversations about that to make sure that we get those things in there. Some of the key factors that affect retirement planning are here. How long do you plan to continue working? What's your life expectancy? And obviously we don't know for sure how long any of us are going to live, but we can look at things like family history and your general health to get an idea. What are your savings? What are your annual spending needs? Inflation matters, and it definitely affects your retirement plan. What are your sources of income in retirement? For most people, that's going to be Social Security, whatever savings you have. If you have a pension or something like that, that's there. What are your investment returns? And then the qualitative factors. So those are some of the more touchy-feely things, but they really matter. What are you going to do with your time? Are you prepared for life without work? Because when you stop working, there's going to be a lot of extra time in your day. Do you have an active social network? What are your hobbies? Where do you want to live? And where you want to live matters, because you want to think about like those things that you want to do. Ideally, it's great if you can be in a place where those things are easiest to do. In the first session, I talked some about a bucket strategy and how that can help protect against the market downturn. So first, I'll go through an example. If your income, let's say that the items of income that you know you have, those are going to be Social Security, and let's assume that that's the 30,000, and where it says how much do you need below the portfolio income, I put that at 18,000, and then the pension income is 12,000. So that gives you $60,000 of income that you have coming in every year. And then your living expenses. So I have for that living expenses of $5,000 a month, or $60,000. I have goals, which are going to be like vacations, cars, how often do you want to get a car? If you have any home improvements, those type of things, let's say those are $25,000 a year. And let's say the taxes are another 15. So that gives you $100,000 of expenses. So your total annual need is going to be the 60 less the 100, which is $40,000. So historically, when we've had bad markets, they've lasted on the order of 18 to 24 months. So I like to think of the idea that we would take 40 times 2, or $80,000, and that's going to be put into safe investments like cash, money markets, maybe some short-term bonds. So if we have that bad market, that's where we're going to pull the cash from. And that's what we're going to use to fund it, so that we don't have to sell assets at depressed prices. Because I always think that kind of the two worst things we can do as investors are buy high and sell low. And so by giving ourselves that cash, it can help us reduce the risk that we have to sell assets into a bad market. Now, I often talk about two buckets. Some people consider a third. I kind of look at the second and third in combination more often than not. But if you have the three buckets, that first bucket's going to cover the first 2 years. The second bucket's going to cover years 2 to 7. So like that money first that you need, if you have to draw for the second bucket, for that first bucket, it's going to come from that middle bucket. That's going to hold some investment grade bonds, high quality stocks like blue chips and dividend payers. And it could hold some real estate investments as well. And then your third bucket is really there to protect against longevity risk, which is the risk we outlive our money. And I'm going to talk more about that on the next slide too. I know I mentioned it a little bit earlier as well. And that third bucket holds your stocks, real estate, and other higher return assets. It's for needs that are more than 7 years out. And so the other thing to think about too is if you have kids or somebody that you want to leave money to, when you're thinking about your time horizon, you might want to say, well, I also want to keep those stocks and things like that, because that helps to increase the longevity and can leave a little bit more for the next generation. So here's some of the key risks to consider. So longevity risk and mortality risk, that's really the risk that we talked about earlier about outliving your assets or having a shortened lifespan. That's mortality risk. It's hard. That's not something we can really protect against from a financial perspective for the most part. That's something we want to protect against through taking care of our health. But longevity risk is the chances that we outlive our money. And so that's again why we don't want to get too conservative with our investments, because we can take away the growth. And if we take away the growth, we can end up without having anything left. Health, and like I said, longevity risk is most damaging the closer it is to your retirement. That's when the market downturn is most damaging to us. Health risk is not being able to pay your healthcare costs. So we do want to make sure we have Medicare, but remember that Medicare doesn't cover everything. So you need to make sure that you have prescription coverage and coverage beyond what just Medicare covers to make, to give yourself some protection. Some people like long-term care insurance. Some people don't. You can also look and see if you can self-fund that. Event risk is the risk that there's an unforeseen event that has a large financial impact. The way we can prepare for that is to try to build flexibility into our spending plan and consider additional insurance to help absorb certain types of shocks. And then tax and policy risk, changes in rules governing health coverage, retirement savings or benefits, or estate planning. You want to make sure your portfolio contains a variety of asset classes and account types, which can give you more flexibility if policies change. And then the other risk that actually I didn't put on here, but I should have, is sequence of return risk. And that's the idea that we know that the market doesn't always go up. We're going to have bad years. And I did talk about this some earlier. When those bad years happen matters, right? The closer they are to retirement, the less advantage we have to do things to counteract them, so that sequence of return close to retirement is most damaging. When it's well before retirement or well after retirement, sequence of return should hurt us less. So the other thing to think about in retirement, a lot of people, I've always been getting a paycheck. I'm not getting one anymore. What now? So I like to think about getting a retirement paycheck. And I have a blog about this on my website. If you go to my website and you click on the blog bar at the top and it brings up the blog page, there's actually a search bar in the middle of the page. And if you put in retirement paycheck, it'll bring up my blog on that. Because transitioning from work to retirement means you have to learn to live without a steady paycheck, and that can be hard. Our expenses continue even after we stop working. I mean, some people try to get their mortgage paid off and try to reduce some expenses, but you're still going to have some expenses, right? You're going to have utilities, and you're going to have vacation, and you're going to have transport, whatever your transportation needs are, and you're going to have to pay taxes and all those type of things. And it would be nice to try to have a reliable income stream in retirement. Doing so could be tricky. We make the right choices that can help us get a sustainable income stream for the rest of our life. And so, that's why it's helpful to have stocks and bonds that produce a steady stream of income that we can count on, hopefully. And then we know what our Social Security income is, that's coming in, and pension. And some people are more comfortable getting annuities. Some people are not. We talked about some of the about annuities in the past last week. Making the wrong choices can leave you short of cash. So that's what you're trying to avoid. When we work, we accumulate our assets. We strive to receive dependable income from our employers or generate it from our businesses. We worry about how much to spend and save, what we want to spend and save our money on, and how we should invest our money. When we get to retirement, the story becomes entirely different. We're not getting that steady paycheck anymore. Like I said, Social Security can provide a base of income. Some people receive a pension, but most want or need more. The other place to turn for income is our investments. If we can secure consistent, dependable retirement income that meets our needs, that's the goal, but that can be more challenging. So this is, we talk about what are your cash needs, what are your income sources. So thinking about the bucket, what are your sources of income or cash? Talk about longevity risk is what we want to protect against. And then we also want to consider sequence of return risk. Like all those things want to factor in. They're all important, but the idea is to try to structure your portfolio so that it can you can get regular distributions. I mean, you can set that up too. Like I have clients that are in retirement that they say, I need X number of dollars per month. And so what happens is on a specific, on a set day every month, money transfers from the brokerage account into their bank account so that they can use that to pay their monthly bills. And when I do a financial plan, there's longer parts to it, but kind of the part that I think people appreciate the most is what I have an example of up on the screen right now, which is the one-page financial plan. You see at the top when we talked about priorities and goals and things that are important to us. So in this plan, I had the most important thing was time with family, and the family priorities are financial security, maintaining quality of life in retirement, and generating income in retirement. You can see on the upper right, it shows net worth, which is your assets less your liabilities. Over time, that can become a graph that shows how your net worth changes over time. For asset allocation, we've talked about that before. That's your mix between stocks, bonds, cash, and other investments. Asset location, which we discussed, is really your breakdown between your assets in taxable accounts versus your assets in tax deferred accounts, and then your assets in tax-free accounts like Roth IRAs and HSAs. There's a little cash flow chart to show how things, where the money's going. We have goals and the status of those goals. Are we on track? Are they for the future? Are they ongoing goals? Then action items at the bottom, we have the current action items and the future action items. So you do an initial plan, and that's kind of the key document to me. And then as we go through time and that plan gets updated, this is the document that gets updated. If a goal or priority changes, we want to make sure that we reflect it when we update this document, as well as, if we've done some of the action item things, that they can fall off and they can be potentially replaced with others. I also got asked about required minimum distributions. So what are they? How are they calculated? So as we talked about it, as I mentioned during the quiz, RMDs start at age 72. If it's your own IRA. If it's an inherited IRA, there's different rules. If the person died in 2020 or later, you have 10 years to take money out of an inherited IRA. There's no rules as to how much you have to take in any one of those years. You just have 10 years to withdraw it. So you can think about your income and your tax situation when determining how long to take that out over. If the person died before 2020, then you use the life expectancy tables, and there's specific amounts that you have to take out each year. And the amount that you take out is based on your balance as of December 31st of the prior year. So for example, right now we're in 2022. Let's assume that on December 31st, 2021, your balance was $411,000 and you're 72. So we look at this table that I have here and we see age 72, the distribution period is 27.4 years. So we take $411,000 and we divide it into 27.4. And that tells us that this year we have to take $15,000 out of that account. If you were age 80, and you have that same $411,000 balance, you would divide it by 20.2. And this year you would have to take out $20,346.53 from your account. And so whatever age you are, you look at that age on that table, you divide it into your December 31st balance, and that tells you how much you have to take out this year. And when it comes to how much you're taking out, you can take it out all at once. You can take it out every month. You can take it out once a quarter. That doesn't really matter. It's helpful when you do that, just like with Social Security payments, to think about having them withhold some taxes from it, state and federal if you can, because that way it can reduce your need or maybe eliminate your need if you structure it right to have to make estimated tax payments. Because remember, that's the other thing that happened when we stopped getting our regular paycheck. Nobody automatically withholds from our money anymore. So you're going to have to pay, usually it's pay estimated taxes. And the easiest way to do that is to let it come out of either your RMD or your Social Security payment. If you have a Roth IRA, there's no requirement to take RMDs at all. So you don't have to take anything out. Part of that idea of having the different types of accounts is to allow you to structure how you take your money out and what the tax bill is that comes with it. And like I said, inherited IRAs have their own set of rules. And it's either the 10-year rule or your life expectancy. So if it was before 2019, you figure out what your life expectancy is in the year that the person died, and then that's your starting point, and then you subtract 1 from it each year. The only thing is that reset this year, because this distribution table that I have, that's the new table that's effective as of January 1st of this year. Before that, it was a different table that started at age 70. This table actually goes to age 120, the old one to 115. So here again are the things that we discovered today. We talked about estate planning. We talked about financial planning. We talked about retirement planning basics. And then I'm open to any other questions that anybody has at this point.
Phil, you mentioned that the bucket strategy, and you mentioned that you will talk about bucket 2 and 3 possibly. Is it going to be still today that you will cover the bucket theory? And if not, then I'll have specific question about the bucket theory.
I mean, I gave an overview, so if you have a specific question.
Yeah,
so
okay.
The first bucket,
yeah.
if we use 3 buckets, the first bucket is to cover like 2 years worth of expenses. The second bucket is, going for the next 2 to 7 years, from the end of year 2 to the beginning, to the end of year 7. And that's going to include, a mix of stocks and bonds, but it's going to include your more conservative allocations within those, like investment grade bonds, high quality stocks, like blue chip stocks, that type of thing. And then that third bucket is for what would be needed in year 7 to 25. I kind of think that you can combine buckets 2 and 3 if you have a good financial plan, because it really helps to determine what your allocation should be. But that's kind of the 3 buckets. The first one is to meet those needs for if we have that market downturn that I talk about. And then the next bucket is the more conservative piece of your overall allocation to cover kind of that middle term. And then the last bucket covers your longer term.
So I have heard of the 3 bucket theory, but I am having a hard time to work with it for myself. So I look at the allocation as 1 bucket divided into 3 parts. I just cannot think of 3 individual things. And here is the reason why. So let's assume that I'm going to retire at the age of 70, whatever the age is, I am going to retire. So I have to have a bucket prepared with 3 allocations, right? So the 1 part of my bucket at the age of 70 is going to be cash that will cover 2 years of expenses, some kind of cash vehicle, okay? Then the rest of the stuff, when I retire, will be covering what part of investment? Is it going to be, how will the investment be allocated outside, past the cash, okay? That's where I am having difficulty with the years, because it says bucket 2 is for years 3 and 6 or 7. And then bucket 3 or section 3 is for 8 beyond. But in reality, I have 1 bucket with all of my investments. And so when do I reallocate these things? This is where I am having difficulty to understanding how it needs to be allocated at retirement. The first day I retire, besides the cash, what else do I need? And we can discuss it. You can either discuss it here, or I can discuss it with you based on my real scenario of my finances.
So that's why I understand where you're coming from. And that's why I think it's a lot of times it's just easier to think of, let's have that 2 years worth of cash, right? And then look at your risk tolerance and look at your financial plan. And let's figure out what the right allocation is for the rest of your portfolio. And like, let's say, for example, that we had $1 million portfolio, and I'm just using that number because it's easy, because I can make everything work, right?
Understood. And
let's say that your cash needs were $100,000, okay, for the next 2 years. Pull that out. Now I've got $900,000 left. What's the right allocation for the 900? For you, like let's look at your plan and say, your plan says, okay, and your risk tolerance says, we're going to be 50-50. That's going to be our allocation. So I'm going to have, within that 900, I'm going to have $450,000. It's going to be in cash and bonds and fixed income, and $450,000 is going to be in stocks. I understand that, like, that's, if I'm splitting it into 2 more buckets, right? That, well, part of that's going to be conservative and part of it's going to be a little bit more aggressive, but I think that I can handle it all. Looking at it collectively, I think that's a little bit easier concept to understand. And just let's look at what my allocation should be. And so then, we have that bad market, right? So that's when I'm going to soak up my cash, right? And then when the bad market stops and recovers, then I can pull back, I can sell stuff out of that other 90% to replenish my cash, because I always want to kind of have that there. And so I kind of I like to think of it that way, because to me, conceptually, it's just a little bit easier to understand.
Right.
Otherwise, you're taking that 450 that I have in each, in stocks and bonds, and you're going to have to segment it and say, okay, out of the 450, I'm going to have, let's say, I'm going to have, like, let's say 500 of it's going to be in the conservative stuff, and then the other 400 is going to be the other piece. I just think that that's a lot harder conceptually to follow. So I like to think of it as the two, and as long as I've got a plan to help support it, I think that's okay.
Yeah, yeah.
It also gets into the idea that many people have thought that as we age, our allocation to stock should get lower and lower, right? And so like if I look at my financial planning software, it takes it all the way down to 20%, and then it just leaves it there. But to me, that's not the best answer. And I've seen research that supports the idea that's not the best answer. Why? Because we want to protect against longevity risk. So the idea to me is, as you get towards retirement, if you're 70-30 or 60-40, you're going to go down, right, a little bit and get to that 50-50 kind of place. And then as you start to move away from retirement, we can actually build our stock allocation back up a little bit. Maybe we even go down to 40-60, right, to protect against longevity risk as we're approaching retirement. But then as we pull away, then we start to sell off some of those bond positions and let our stock allocation go back up some to help protect us against longevity risk. And the research that I've done, that I've read, supports, that's where I got the idea from reading research.
Right.
Supports that, because it's a good way to protect against longevity risk. Because that's like, that's the hard part, right? Is that we outlive our money and we can't do what we want. We get to that point where we can't do things.
Right, right. So thank you. Yeah, I agree with what you said, and it makes a little more sense. I have seen the plan allocated in 3 buckets, and just it didn't make sense for me. How do I apply this in real life? So thank you. And yes, I have read something similar where what you said, that it is not to the best advice to bring everything down to basically just bonds and little bit of SVH. At some point, the curve goes back, it changes, and we need to determine where is the bottom of the curve, and when do we start reallocating more towards stocks and less towards the bonds. But thank you. And one quick question, or just a comment. You were talking about having the flexibility to drawing money out based on how well the market is doing. But the thing is, with RMDs, we really don't have, I mean, we have to take the money out of the account regardless of the market. And all we can do is either decide if it is a good market, we take it once a year if possible. If it is a bad market, well, I have to think about it, but depending on the market, we either take it in monthly or whatever increments, or we take it as one chunk, because we really have to take the money out. We don't have option to just give them cash. We actually physically have to draw the money out. So that's the issue.
It is. So when you get that, when you take that money out, though, you don't have to, remember, you don't have to spend it. We can always put it into another, we can reinvest it into a taxable account, right? Like, if you go back to my example, I had in the RMD, it was $15,000. If I 10, I still have to take out the 15, but I can take 5 and I can put it into my brokerage account and reinvest it. Yes, I had to pay tax to get it out, but I have the ability to put it back in the market. And then like the idea about a lot of people that I work with, I think it's easier, instead of taking that, if your RMD is a decent size amount, right? And depends upon your taxable account, the size of your taxable account too. But the idea of being able to take out your RMD on a monthly basis, well, it's kind of a dollar cost averaging in reverse, right? Because whatever the market does, I'm taking it out the 5th of every month, and that works from that perspective. And that also it allows us to have regular income coming in instead of taking it all at once and then having to make it last. Like, I know one of the things that I've commented on to my wife since I started my business, my clients pay me quarterly. I'm used to, in the past, I got paid every 2 weeks or twice a month, and now I get paid once a quarter. And like, that's been a big adjustment for me, is say, now I'm getting paid once a quarter, and I have to make sure that I make that money last. So like what I do is I put it into it goes into my business account, and then I pull it out of my business account as we need it. So we don't look at that regular checking account and say, oh, there's all this money there, we can do something. I don't want to do that. So it's easier to just say, we're going to release it as we need it and make sure that it lasts.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions?
I have an inherited IRA from my mother, and she passed in July of 20. So we have, I have 10 years.
Correct.
And so I made the mistake last summer of going ahead and, selling, I guess it was 10%, and it ended up, and I went ahead and withheld state and federal tax from it. And then and it was it was bonds, which was not doing well at that point. So, it was a good thing to take out. But I think that, I know that my brother had said, no, you can really wait. We really don't have to touch this until you get closer to that 10 years. And because that is, and if you could help explain to me, so I understand the difference in the tax rate. Like he said, that was taxable at a different rate than if I was selling some stock in, or out of a fund in something else that I had lost money in. Does that make sense?
I think so. And I'm going to try, Claudia. And if I don't answer your question, tell me. Okay. So the first thing is, let's say that you have $100,000 that you got in an inherited IRA. You have 10 years to take that out.
Right.
Right. You can take it out $10,000. I mean, and I'm using no growth, right? Because we're just saying it's $100,000. I can take out $10,000 a year. I could take out nothing for 9 years and take out $100,000 all in year 10, or some mix, or I could take out $20,000 every other year, whatever the case may be. I have 10 years to withdraw the money. I normally, so there's tax rate, there's tax tables, and I don't remember where the break points are, but I know that there's a 10% rate, there's a 12% rate, there's a 22% tax bracket, there's a 24% bracket, then it goes up to 32. If I look at the different amounts of income that I know that I have coming in that year, and I say, okay, I'm going to be in the 22% tax bracket to pick one, right? Mm-hmm. And I say, or before I have that, before that inherited IRA this year, I'm going to be in the 22% bracket. And that's where I expect to be. Like, my income shouldn't change that much. So I'm assuming it's going to stay around that tax rate for a while. And let's say that I have that bracket. I don't remember exactly where it goes from. So let's just say it went up to, for a single person, it went up to $90,000 of income. And let's say that before your inherited IRA, you had $70,000 of income. Okay. I might say that I'm going to take in $15,000 a year, or even 10 to go to the right. That still keeps me in that 22% bracket. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm going to pay on it. If I take $25,000, I just push $5,000 of income into the 24% bracket. Okay. I don't really want to do that because now I'm paying more than if I did it on a more ratable basis. So like, that's the kind of things that I want to look at when I'm deciding how much to take in each year. Like, so I tell clients, like, let's have a conversation in October, right? Because that's when that's when you start to have a really good idea. This is what my income looks like for the year. And this is when it makes sense for me to take some of that in because I have some room. It's like, we want to consider your Social Security income, because that, how much income you have determines how much of that they tax. We want to look at, if you have Medicare benefits, there's something called an IRMA adjustment, which we talked about, the income related monthly adjustment amount. We don't want to push you over a threshold that makes your Medicare premiums go up. We want to look at a lot of different things, but in general, the IRA is going to be taxed at your ordinary tax rate. It's not going to be taxed at a capital gains rate. It's going to be taxed at your ordinary rate. So here it's just figuring out, how do we try to take that into income in a way that doesn't make my tax rate balloon?
Okay.
Because like, I could, if you took the whole $100,000 in 1 year, that could push you not just, I said we were in the 22% bracket, that might even push you into the 32% bracket let's say that your income was 85 and now you got 100 and it's 185,000 this year, right? That could push you up into the 24% bracket. We don't want to do that.
Okay, good.
Does that address your questions?
Yes.
Okay. Any others?
I'm not sure for today, for me. I think I'll try to get some other stuff figured out.
Okay.
Lots of moving pieces.
There always are, that's right.
Yes.
So just briefly, here's how I work with clients. I work as a fiduciary. That means I'm obligated to provide my clients, to put my client's best interest ahead of my own. I provide my clients with a fiduciary oath because it's really important to me that I do that. I have two different fee structures when I work with people. I can work with people based upon assets under management. And for portfolio holding ETFs and or mutual funds, the fee starts at 1% for the first $500,000 of assets, and it goes down to 0.85% for assets from 500,000 to 2 million. And I use what's called the cliff structure. So if you go over that $500,000, everything is at 0.85%, nothing is at 1%. Other firms will use stair step and they would still have that piece at 1%. I don't do that. And then I also have a retainer type structure where I receive a flat quarterly fee, and that includes assets up to $250,000. I know some of you have already scheduled calls with me. Anybody else that would like to, here's a link to my calendar. I set up a special calendar page just for people that attended the workshop that haven't scheduled already. And you can schedule anytime between now and March 8th is how long that will last. If you have trouble finding a time, please reach out, because I got into trouble at one point because I have an open calendar and I got too many appointments on it. And all of a sudden, like, I couldn't get anything done. So I get a certain number of appointments on a day and then I will cut it off so that I make sure I can get other things done too. But always, if people reach out to me directly, I'll look and figure out where where else I might have room. Unless anybody has other questions, that's all that I have. I hope you benefited from the workshop, got what you're looking for out of it. I will be sending, as I have in the past, I'll be sending out the slides. I haven't, this is recorded, so I'll send you the link to the recording. I'll send out the quiz. I also have a survey that I'll send out, and I would appreciate it if you could fill that out. I will be doing this again. So if you know anybody else that might be interested, please let them know. And I may also do another one where I go a little bit deeper into some of these topics than I have today. So if there's other topics that you think weren't covered, you can tell me that on the survey as well.
Phil, how long are the recordings available to us?
They should be available for as long as you need them. I still haven't, I did this workshop in November, and I still have those up there. So they're still on Dropbox for people that attended the first time. So they should still be there for a while.
Okay, great.
All right. I don't want to just keep you here unnecessarily. So if nobody else has any other questions, I'll give you back a little bit of extra time in your day. And I do want to thank everybody for attending, and I hope you found this helpful and worthwhile.
Well, thank you, Phil. This was very good. And of course, I have many questions, but in regards, because like you said, like Claudia said, or you said, that there are so many movable parts that you move one thing and two other things suddenly fall out, or you have to. So I think intellectually, just by thinking about it, it's very hard to keep it all in balance. And of course, there are a lot of rules, and some of the rules are very general and some are very specific to a certain combination of things. And so that's where it becomes very hard to make these decisions, because if you overlook some of the very minute specific rules, suddenly you have created yourself a problem for yourself. And and especially with I have really a big topic on converting traditional IRA into a Roth IRA, and so it would be great to go through that. I think it's a very popular topic these days for many people. Unfortunately, when I heard about it 5 years ago or even before, I was reading articles they were suggesting against it. So my mind was set to, the question was convert or not convert. And without really looking at the bigger picture and the future, my decision was not to convert. As I find out these days, it might have been better to do the conversions in the prior years. But here are the things that we make decisions for ourselves based on sometimes a limited information or limited belief and limiting belief. And then that sort of causes us issues further down the road. So
Yes.
I think that the conversion probably could be covered somehow, maybe with some examples, or just for future, I don't know, just have maybe topics, maybe have sessions, if it is feasible and possible for you, have topics, have sessions just for a specific topic and go more into depth, like the example of the conversion, when would it apply and why, and or choosing traditional versus Roth IRA, things like that. So they just came to me,
Okay. You can also, so Veronica, I have written some blogs on Roth conversion.
Yeah.
So you
I'll
can
have to go back.
also look for, again, go to my website, and if you go to the blog page, there's a search tool, and you can find what I wrote. And it's funny when you were talking about like there's so many things to know. So I've got, my oldest son has started to help me with the business. And I was talking to him like, so how are things going? He goes, how do you keep it all straight? There's a lot of stuff to know because there's all these different rules.
Right. And the rules change from year to year too. Sometimes what was good before, I have a friend and he was calculating his RMDs this year, and he said, these numbers don't jive. I don't know why. He wasn't aware that the table had changed from last year to this year. So he was calculating it, and he said, I saved myself, I don't know, $4,000 by using the proper table. So, these are the kind of things that it's kind of hard to keep track when you have real life and regular life, and finances are not your 100% occupation. It's very hard to keep track of these things.
Yeah, that's right. And I said, that's why you always see me reading too.
Yeah.
You read a lot to keep up.
Of course, yeah. And especially, I think it's much harder for you being working alone for yourself, because you have a finite number of hours to split between actively working and then reading and updating yourself. Whereas if you have a group, somebody will let you know, somebody does the research, and like in a company, I know when something changes in my company, there is an email that goes out to everybody. I don't have to find it on my own. And so I think it's more time consuming for you to stay on top of things, because, there is only so much you can read in any one day. So
that's true.
Yeah.
And it won't be me forever. That's like my long-term plan has those people to help me with that stuff.
Right. Well, good luck with that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If we would email you, like I have a call with you next week. And when we were talking about background, and I guess when I was going over today with what you were talking about, I think it's that what my short and long-term goals are, and then we'll kind of go from there. And I'll probably email you, in this next couple of days, and try to get a little bit more information about what you need.
Okay, great.
Okay, good. Yeah, because there's, I mean, there's just, I can't agree more. Just when you think you can kind of slow down a little bit, it doesn't happen. So I breathe a lot and, uh, I just learning all the time. So I appreciate that. So anyway,
I'm glad to hear it.
thanks so much. And
You're
I'll get
welcome.
this off to you and then we can talk next week.
Okay, great.
Okay, great. Oh, I love your little dog there back in the.
Oh, thank you. There's two. There's one on
Oh,
the
there's
chair
two
too.
of 'em? Oh, okay.
They're actually sisters.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Great.
They're about, what are they? They're 16 months apart, but they're sisters.
Wow. They've been so quiet.
Yeah, they hang out in here a lot.
Okay. Okay. Great. So I'll let you go and
All right.
I'll be back in touch.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.